My name is Hallie Jones. I'm the Executive Director of Laguna Canyon Foundation, and I'm really here today, not necessarily in my role at Laguna Canyon Foundation, but in my role as a member of the Safe Trails Coalition. So really happy to be supporting this conversation between Orange County Parks and the Safe Trails Coalition, as well as members of the public. Okay, one more reminder just to everybody to keep themselves muted while we get started. So the Safe Trails Coalition, for those of you who don't know us, hold on just one second. All right, perfect. The Safe Trails Coalition is a group of organizations that came together really with one focus and one purpose, and that is to find the balance that we all seek between recreation and conservation, understanding that our parks have a very unique and very critical balance between important habitat as well as dense populations and a lot of people who want to be in those parks. So the Safe Trails Coalition came together to figure out how we can find that balance. STC was founded by Audubon, California. I'm reading my list here to make sure I don't leave anyone out. Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks, Laguna Canyon Foundation, who I represent, Sea and Sage Audubon, and Sierra Club. And specifically today, in bringing this group together, I want to thank Melanie and Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks for pulling this group together, and Sea and Sage Audubon for providing the Zoom platform. So thank you to both you guys. I want to thank Pam and Joanne from Orange County Parks for being willing to engage in this dialogue. It's not always an easy part of your jobs, I'm sure, but just we're so grateful that you guys are here and happy to be engaging with us. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to try to accomplish today. As I said, I'm here, really just to moderate the conversation. I'm not the boss of anything other than the mute button. So I'm here to help facilitate the dialogue. We have solicited from many of you guys questions on the OC Parks Trails Pilot Project. I think that all of us on this call have seen trail use go up. We've seen, additional users in the parks. We've seen additional impacts. And, I think the conversation is so critical around what we can do to be protecting the habitat and protecting all of our experiences out in the park. So we did ask for those questions to be submitted in advance, and we got a lot of questions, which I'm really grateful for. I will, do what I'm probably most well known for, which is be very blunt here and say that some of those questions were perhaps a little heated and, perhaps a little laser focused directed. And you're going to hear in this conversation that we're not going to get to all of those questions, both in the interest of time. We have a hard stop at 3 o'clock. We're going to be very respectful of that. So we're not going to get to every conversation or every question that was submitted. And I do commit to you that if your question that you submitted ahead of time does not get covered, or if you have a question that comes up, go ahead and type it in the chat. We will not be answering all of them, as I said, but I do commit to you that we will be compiling those and submitting them in writing to Orange County Parks. So you have an opportunity to make sure that your question does get to the right people, just might not be in today's conversation. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Pam Passow, who is the Deputy Director of Orange County Parks, and Joanne Veter with OC Parks for a presentation on the Trails Pilot Program, and then we'll go ahead and go into the questions. So Pam, I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hallie. And good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see so many smiling faces. It is a beautiful Monday day. And we just wanted to be able to give some of the information on what is happening with OC Parks. And so I wanted to at least give you a high level basically small, short presentation. Because we only have 1 hour, I am not going to go into great detail. Everything that you would like to be able to look into is actually available. So I am going to show you where you can find information on the Trails Pilot Project. And so let's see. All right, I'm hoping everybody can see my screen now. Yes, okay, good. So this is our website, ocparks.com. Super easy to find. A lot of government websites are really complicated addresses. Ours is as simple as you can make it. If you Google OC Parks, this will come up as the first one. So ocparks.com. And so here you can see, here's our highlights of what is happening in OC Parks. I highly recommend you look at this regularly anyway, because we have very exciting programs going on all the time. So as you can see here, our summer concert series, we still have another week on that. So as you scroll down, you'll see, here's what's important right now, what's happening in OC Parks. So here is our Trail Use Pilot Project. So if you click on that, it's going to take you to a page all about the Trail Use Pilot Project. And so on this page is a lot of really useful information. And so I just really wanted to make sure that, I know people were having questions on what is the Trails Pilot Project, where can I get more information? And so I just wanted to make sure that all of you would be able to see how easy it is to be able to get the information. And so for those of you who don't even know what this is, the Trail Pilot Project was designed to be able to look at what is the basic ideology of OC Parks. So in the past, what we had was an ideology of every park for everyone, every trail for everyone. Oh, and now I guess, let's see. There we go. See, I didn't move enough. That's fun, isn't it? So looking at this ideology, we were really looking at each of our trails in our wilderness parks of, should every trail that can be everything to everyone? And it was a fundamental question. I know that there's been a lot of talk of, well, we just need to add more trails. Well, for those of you that understand about some of the enrollment that we have with NCCP or HCCP, we have a lot of restrictions that are on the lands that we have. And so we have to be very good stewards of making sure that we are not just adding trails without the proper process. And in most of those processes, we are not able to just add trails. It's a really, it's one of those things where we are looking more at conservation as opposed to recreation. And so we want to make sure that we're balancing the recreation with the conservation and habitat. And so I know that you all know this, but just wanted to make sure I put that out there. And so what we did is we said, okay, if we are looking at, should we make these trails multi-use or single use, or should we be looking at directionality, or should we be looking at the type of usage? And so the pilot project is really just looking at a snapshot of 3 wilderness parks and a very small sample of the entire usage. And so the initial timeline for this is 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, our Trails subcommittee will be reviewing the data and seeing if we should be continuing it longer or if we have enough information at that time. So the Trails Pilot Project began this summer, and it is planned to be ending around December. And then we will be looking at the data in January. And so that's sort of the initial timeline here looking at this. So here on this website, you have all these different great things. So you can see the trail use changes, the signage that we selected. And if you go to any of these parks, and there's 3 parks, so Aliso and Wood Canyons Wilderness, Laguna Coast Wilderness, and Santiago Oaks Regional Parks, there's maps here of each of those parks and where the affected trails are. So I just wanted to make sure that you all knew just a little bit of information. The project started on June 1st. And so here is a place. So one of the questions that was asked was, how do you give some input? So this is a place where you can provide feedback on our website. So you just click here and you can insert your feedback. You can only provide feedback during this process one time. And the whole point of doing it only one time is so that way we can make sure that everybody's voices is heard and that we don't have one person submitting 1,000 entries. It's really about one time, one thing. But if you have additional comments, let's say that you have a different experience, you can go and email our admin trails subcommittee at ocparks.com. And if you put on the subject line, trails pilot project feedback in the subject line, this way we'll be able to get that and we'll know what this is about. So then we'll know it's specifically about this. And so then this is just the basic stuff. Now, for those of you that don't know, the Trails Subcommittee is a subcommittee of the OC Parks Commission, and they're tasked with looking at our trails within our OC Park system. And so they really are the group that really manages of what the policies should we be doing, how should we be looking at this. They look at design, they look at a whole plethora of things. And so they are really the place to go when you have questions on trails or you have input to trails. So if you click on here at the bottom, it has the Park Trails Subcommittee. If you click on that, and I know there's a lag always, then you can see the Trails Subcommittee. So this has every single agenda, every single packet. And so for every single presentation that we have presented to the Trails Subcommittee, it's all in here. And so you can go through this. One of the things that we're fixing right now, we're always trying to improve, as you can imagine, is making it so that it is in chronological backwards order. Sometimes it's messing it up because of the way that the verbiage is. So please bear with us. We try to do the best that we can. But if you go to, let's see, here we go. So if you go here to the 2020-12-10 Trails Pilot Project presentation, this will give you the original pilot project presentation that was given. So you can get all of the information in the beginning of us trying to do this. And then if you keep going, you'll see the subsequent meetings. The Trails Subcommittee meets quarterly. So that's 4 times per year. They just last met in July, and their next meeting will be approximately in October. And at the October meeting, we are hoping that we actually are planning on having some data, some preliminary data to share with the Trails Subcommittee. And then we'll have a larger presentation in January after all of the data has been received. And so this is just a basic, very high level area, just so you can have some basic understanding of the Trails Pilot Project. So some of the questions have been asking, how did we select the trails? So our park rangers are very familiar with our parks that work at the trail, are familiar with the trails that work at the parks. And so they saw which trails had some of more issues as far as conflict on those trails, and maybe some ways that they thought maybe we could be able to alleviate some of that tension. And so that was part of it, is looking at that. And then there's a lot of public meetings that we really presented all this information to. So this was brought to the Trails Subcommittee, the OC Parks Commission, the Coastal Greenbelt Authority, as well as some high level information was also brought to the foundation as well. So really just looking at different ways for us to be able to let the public know about what are we doing and how are we doing it. The other thing is we made sure that we let people know ahead of time on which trails were going to be affected. At each of the park entrances, there's information on this pilot project and where it is, so it has maps. And then at each of the entrances and exits, depending on which way you're looking at it, at each of the trails, there's also information on what are the modifications to those trails. So we tried really hard to make sure that we were as transparent as possible and making sure that we received as much public comment as possible as well, between the time that we brought this in December of 2020 to the time that we started the program in June of 2021. And so that is the basic information on it. One of the questions I know have been asked is, how are we enforcing it and how is it different from other trails? So with a lot of our other trails, it's hard to see what is exactly the issue that they're having on that trail. So if you have a trail that is, let's say, hiking only, and there's a mountain bike on it, it's really simple. Mountain bike's not supposed to be on there. And we have had that on some of our hiking only trails in the past. So that makes it very easy to enforce. You're not allowed to be here if you're a mountain biker, but you're allowed to be here if you're a hiker. when you're looking at these pilot project trails, you have trails that are one way only for certain users, and some of them are single use or modified use. And so that makes it very simple as well for being able to enforce what are the rules. And so in the beginning, it was really about letting people know. So through the whole month of June, it was just letting people know, hey, here's what's happening. Wanted to make sure that you knew that there's modifications on this trail, and really doing education. July 1st started enforcement, and so that gave our park rangers the ability to cite. Most of the users have been following the rules, which is fantastic. And we know that not everyone follows them all the time, and our park rangers can't be everywhere at all the time. But I think that sort of gets into some of the things that we want to work on today, which is how can you help us help our trail users understand what are the rules and why we have them, and how to have a better environment for everyone. So then that is the enforcement portion of it. One of the questions was about, should we be increasing our fines? It's something that we've looked at with our commission, and we're going to be bringing that at a future meeting. So stay tuned on that one. We already have people who fight their citations, even though they're pretty low. But we feel that we probably will see higher fighting of those citations, which sometimes gets messy, to say the least. But we are looking at that because we want to see, should we be increasing them and making sure that we're in line with other public agencies as well, that we're not higher than they are. And then looking at so it's a little complicated when you ask the question of how much money is it going to cost for someone to have an infraction? It depends. And the reason it depends is that we sometimes have layers on fines. So it might be that there is a $60 infraction, but there's also another one where they've already done something wrong, and this is the same citation twice, so then we're actually able to increase it. So we sometimes have like a $300 citation or something as low as $60. It just depends on if they're a repeat offender or if this is their first time. And that's something that we work with our dispatch on checking those things for us. And then looking at this, we talked about the public input. So we do have Utah State that is our partner in this whole process. And so you may or may not be aware of Utah State and the involvement they've had as a partner with OC Parks in the past, but they have helped us with other things in the past of really doing more of the research side. And so they are a partner in this. And so we're looking at that. And I think that's a pretty good amount of information of the basic stuff. I don't want to go too far, but I just want to make sure I at least covered all the questions that were asked on this. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Pam. You can go ahead and stop sharing your screen now.
Oh yeah, that would be good.
So those dates, I was trying to do the math really quickly in my head. Wait, 2020, 2021, I was trying to figure it out. Thank you so much for that, Pam. I think that was a great overview. Already certainly hit some of the questions that I know people had. So there's a number of questions that have been submitted that we're going to try and cover today. And there are some questions that are specifically for Orange County Parks, and then there are some questions really for the user groups as represented by the Safe Trails Coalition today, in terms of how we can effectively partner with Orange County Parks to really encourage responsible use of our open space. And one of the first questions that I'm going to throw out there is kind of a large one, Pam, and this is around monitoring. So, how are the trails that are involved in this pilot project being monitored before, during, after? What kind of data is being collected and how? But then also, from a bigger perspective, the lands specifically that are part of the NCCP that are underneath these, real heavy conservation agreements, how is the land itself being monitored in terms of, looking and seeing how it's changing perhaps under climate change or, user impacts, things like that?
Okay, so lots of parts of that question. So for the pilot project, before we started this project, we used drones to actually look at the condition of each of those trails. Prior to that, I should back up. Our field staff and the parks, they actually made sure that each of these trails were looking in their best shape. And then we did the drone footage, working with Utah State to make sure that we had a baseline of here is what this trail looks like prior to the implementation of any changes to these trails. And then we will also be doing drone footage at the end of this. So at the end of the trial period. And so really making sure that we see what are the actual effects of any changes that we're doing. Even if it's a temporary change, that's part of the whole thing. We've also been doing trail counters. So there's two types of trail counters that we have been employing during this. And so we have a automatic one. So each time someone goes by on any of these trails, we are counting them. And so it's an automatic. So if you walk by, that's a count. If you ride by, that's a count. If you gallop by, that's a count. So obviously, depending on the mode of transportation. Now, what it doesn't do on the automatic trail counters is it doesn't show what type of user is using it. It just says, here we go. And it's not perfect because if you have two people side by side, it might only count you once. And it might count you twice if you go forward and then go back and then go forward again. So it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. The other thing that we've been doing is actually visual counting and verifying the data. So we've had quite a few volunteers and people working with us to look at this and say, okay, during this 1 hour, we're going to go to this trail and we're going to document, okay, we have seen 10 hikers going down. We have seen 20 mountain bikers going up. We've seen 5 hikers going down, whatever. So they're really specifically saying, what is it doing? All of this data is given to Utah State, and they're the ones who are evaluating it. Since research is what they do, they're fantastic at it, and we're grateful that they're able to really evaluate all of this. We'll have some initial data that we'll be able to review at the October meeting, and then we'll have the final data for the first 6 months at the January meeting for the trail subcommittee. The other thing is from the public input. So prior to the start of the official program, we had Utah State out, and they were doing surveys of people right there, asking them a set of questions. Then they came back this summer to do a follow-up during the program so they could find out, okay, how has this changed? And so that information also will be in the information. And looking at all of these things. So there's just a ton of data that we're really reviewing, and Utah State is doing the bulk of it, thank goodness, because they are really great at analyzing this and helping us understand. We also realize that this is great information, whatever we end up doing with these specific trails, because it's data that we probably wouldn't have gotten of, okay, when do we see the highest usage? And with COVID, as you talked about, we've really seen an increase in our wilderness parks, and we're curious to see, will this increase continue? We saw it much higher than we had in the past. And so we really are analyzing all this data so we can see, okay, what are we doing? Can we do this? As far as really looking at how are we protecting our lands, we take that very seriously at OC Park. So we have a whole unit within our department on natural resources. And so they're really looking at that and seeing, okay, how can we make sure that we continue to protect our land? How can we make sure that what we're doing is okay? We also have paleontological and archaeological units as well. And they'll also go out there and see, okay, is there anything here that we need to protect that might be of significance, so that we're looking at that as well. So we're really looking at everything and making sure that we're being good stewards, because the way that we look at it is that we are the stewards of these lands, and they're for everybody. And so we want to make sure that we protect them so that our grandkids and their grandkids will also have these parks, as obviously we all love them. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, I know I threw a lot at you, Pam, with that one question. So thank you for remembering all the aspects of it. One of the questions that's come up is specifically around some of the sensitive natural resources and how those are impacted or potentially impacted by this Trails pilot program. So was there any specific research done on those sensitive species? I know that Utah State their focus tends to be more on recreation and impacts to the land rather than the biological surveys, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So we had our natural resources team go out there ahead of time to see, is there anything here that possibly could be impacted by the trail usage and the modifications. They're also going out there on a regular basis to check on things. So what's wonderful about our team, in my humble opinion, is that we really have a symbiotic relationship between our different sections. So if our staff that are actually at the park, they see something, they call the natural resources team and get them out there right away. Hey, we're seeing something weird here. I don't know what's going on, but let's come out there. And so they'll come out there right away and look at it. But it's a regular part of their daily duties, is really looking at what are we doing and making sure that we're really paying attention to the habitat and making sure that we're not doing something that's going to negatively impact any of those areas.
Great, thank you. Next question. There are other parks that are part of the NCCP that could benefit from improved trail etiquette. And is there any discussion around expanding this project to other parks within OC Park?
A great question. So I don't know yet. It depends on what the data shows us. If it shows that this is actually beneficial, then this is something that we would recommend expanding. If we find that this was not a great idea, then this will be the end of it. And so it's really looking at it and seeing, okay, which parts are actually working and which parts aren't. We have a very open mind on what is this going to show us. So if we find that some of this is actually really helpful, but some of it's not, then we're going to try to put together another pilot project, which would then be maybe a hybrid of what we've just done. Or it's maybe showing us that this was a terrible idea. And if it is, it's okay. For us, it's really looking at, we have higher usage on our trails and we cannot just keep expanding and adding trails. So what are our choices? And so I know there are other public agencies that are looking at what we're doing, and they can't wait for the data either, because if this is successful, then they're going to want to copy what we're doing as well. And so I don't know, maybe. If it's successful, yes. If it's not, then no.
Right. Good way to look at it.
Yeah.
And I think from what I understand from your previous answers, Pam, success would be defined by a combination of that, positive feedback in terms of user experience, combined with, what you guys are seeing actually on the ground with the natural resources, and no impact to the natural resources themselves.
Correct.
Okay.
Or even a positive impact.
Right, which would be great. We started to see some, trail narrowing and things like that. That would be really wonderful. Okay, I'm trying to, combine categories of questions so we can be efficient with our time. There's a question here that I think really is for both the Safe Trails Coalition and for Orange County Parks, which is, and this is $1 million question, right? I think none of us would be here if we had the answer to this. But really, how can trail users peacefully and safely coexist on the trails? So I'm gonna kick that to you, Pam, first, and then open it up to members of the Safe Trails Coalition, specifically to Melanie and or Teresa, if you guys have an answer to that as well.
So I think it starts with our patrons really respecting each other. And so if you're talking about the mountain bikers, it's slowing down and using a bell on the trails that they're allowed to be on, not going on the trails that are unauthorized, not going on the trails that are hiking only or equestrian only, and really paying attention. For our hikers, it's also paying attention to their surroundings, not going 5 across. We've seen that recently with having new users. They don't really understand the etiquette as a hiker as well. And so we've actually had some hikers who blocked mountain bikers instead of actually working with them and understanding that this is a shared trail. It's unfortunate. So I think it's really education and having our users really understand that we're all there to share these trails and that we're not getting more. So how can we coexist better peacefully, which I know is your question, but I think it's really hard. I think it's really having our users take personal responsibility. As a user myself, I've been using our trails for years and years, and I love them and I respect them. And I'm always grateful when the other trail users that I'm sharing the trails with are also respectful. It just makes the experience just so much better. I also try to go when it's not quite so busy, because then it's easier. It's easier to be able to use the trails. I was at Santiago Oaks Park recently, and I was there during the week. I did not see one mountain biker, and it was fabulous as we were walking it and hiking it to look at some of the existing conditions. And I know that that's been one of the concerns that the public has had, is it's just filled with mountain bikers, but it really is about, when are you going? And I know not everyone has that luxury, but if you're really looking at what time is the best time to go, and it depends on what your usage is, and looking at when is it more of a low time compared to a high use time. If you go Saturday morning, you're probably going to have a packed trail no matter where you go. And so I think it's also looking at that as well. So in a nutshell, our patrons being more respectful and understanding what our signage means. We're talking about yielding. It's yielding, but also with being nice. So that's all. We just want everyone to be
common
nice.
sense. Yeah, definitely. Melanie and Teresa, do you have a perspective on that from representing user groups?
Well, I have a perspective on it from just being a park user and someone that's helped, conserve land in Orange County. I think, I don't see that it should be that hard. I think the respect thing is really right on the mark. My parks around me are Santiago Oaks and Irvine Regional Park. I think for the most part, the user groups are pretty respectful. We have a lot of sort of variety, equestrian, mountain bikers, hikers, birders, you name it, kids in the park. And people, we do have some problems, but I have to say, mountain bikers and equestrians seem to be getting along pretty good. And they try to be respectful. If there's a problem, they try to talk it out, which I think is good. I'm always I always have said for years, no one user group should dominate. So that means shared experience. And, we have like an interstate roadway system and streets, and somehow people are able to figure out how to get along on our freeways, peacefully for the most part. Now there's going to be some wild thing out there, but if we have clear rules, and I think one of the most important things are meaningful fines. I do not think we have meaningful fines, and I don't think we should shy away from that, because I know people, equestrians, I know mountain bikers, they want the rogue users to be fined, because they don't want to be grouped into, we're like them. And I know both mountain bikers and I know both equestrians, and they want people to follow the rules. So I think we can work this through, and I hope that all the user groups will participate. That's how I feel about it. So it can be achieved, Pam. I think it can be. So and we're looking to you. Okay.
Thanks, Teresa.
Yes.
Melanie, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I did want to, I'll just add a little bit of information on your original question, and then ask one that's popped up in the chat. I think Pam had mentioned signage. It's really important that the folks that are on the trails are using the authorized trails, the ones that have been created in the park, that have been the historic fire roads, whatever, access roads. But when folks go off, create their own trail, or those social trails end up getting further used, which is not only not helpful to the plants and animals, but it adds work, time, restoration, enforcement, all sorts of things get compounded on the park manager's side. And in an emergency situation, that can be really hazardous if you're not on a trail that's documented somewhere. So, and I think ultimately my goal is positive first experiences in nature. And it is absolutely the recreational users' responsibility to not only pack the appropriate things, whether it's water, sunscreen, chapstick, whatever their essentials are for that particular location, but also understand the rules of the park that they're in. Are bikes allowed here? Are hikers allowed here? How do you interact with an equestrian when you come up? Do you need to make an announcement? And I think there's also a comment that had come up about if you're hard of hearing or hearing impaired, the use of the bells is not quite the same if that's an issue for you. And so you have to be considerate of challenges that other folks may have. So segueing over to the question that was asked in the chat was about fines. And I think, I don't know if Joanne wants to answer this or Pam, but the question was, what are the fines? And I know it's been in presentations in the past. So if it's easier to just point us to that location and we share that information in our follow-up email, that's fine if you don't have the answer off the top of your head.
Yeah, I think that would, because it's more complicated than just one fine, I think it would be better for us to just share all of it at the same time.
Perfect.
And then one of the comments in here was talking about earbuds. I agree. When you have any of our users who have their headphones on, they cannot hear what's happening. They also can't hear the wildlife. And so we do have wildlife in our parks, and sometimes people forget about that. We have mountain lions, we have coyotes, we have little bunnies that sometimes I think are mountain lions after we've just had a sighting. So it's really important that we're listening and we're watching, and our rattlesnakes, and we should not be bothering them. And so it's really important that we're listening for them. And if they want to cross the trail, we need to let them and take our time. And so I think when we're not listening to the wildlife, I think that's really difficult as well. So earbuds out, right?
Right.
Unless you're on a Zoom meeting and you're listening, then it's okay.
Yeah. Teresa, you mentioned that the equestrians and the mountain bike community seem to be getting along pretty well in your parks. And I did just want to acknowledge the representatives from the mountain bike community who are on this call, who are working really hard to make those relationships stronger. Mike, Brad, Steve, and David, you guys are, I know, working hard in your communities as well. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, and Hallie, one thing I do want to say, and I know mountain bikers, are trying, but we really have to encourage, the night riders to not ride at night, because that just doesn't really work. I would be more in favor of them, early morning riding, I think, maybe. Because I do see them out there, 5 o'clock, and I get it. I get they want to get their ride in. I understand. But there's so much nightlife that gets disturbed, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock out there. So we need to remedy that. But I do think, when you have the user groups that sort of put pressure on each other, I think that it really does work. So I think we've had a bit of success with that at least in Santiago Oaks Park. So that's my take.
I agree.
I think, Teresa, when you talk about the night riding or early morning, if anyone sees anybody trespassing in our parks, and that means if they're there after hours or they're there before hours, you call the sheriff. Because that's trespassing. And so if you know that there's a certain group that goes every Tuesday at 10 p.m., that's easy for us to be able to go and stop that. but most of the time it's random times. And so if you see it, you call the sheriff, they patrol all of our parks and they can go and they can arrest them, and they have. We've had that happen. And so anytime, if the more that we do that, the less likely you're going to have users that are there after hours or before hours. Where if it's, at 6 a.m. when we're opening and they're there at 5:55, maybe we don't care as much. But when we're talking about 4 a.m., that's not a great idea for the wildlife. They're more likely to get hurt in our wilderness parks when they're there before the sun rises and after the sun sets. And so we really don't want anybody there. So please help us by reporting it and having them go.
Okay, so you want those calls not to the rangers, you want them to directly to the sheriff's department?
Well, you're talking about times that we're not there. And
No,
so
I understand that. In the past, what we've done, Pam, is, I mean, I've kind of sort of not done it lately, but let the rangers know because they were keeping logs. So
no, I think that's fantastic. But if you see a group of people going in late at night, they're probably not there to help clean up or something. So they're probably under nefarious action. So,
yes.
So I think if we could start calling, and then, if you could let our rangers know too, that's helpful as well.
Okay.
I think at the time, it would be awesome.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you.
So just to synopsize, the calling the sheriff's department when people are trespassing where they're not supposed to be after park ranger hours gets an immediate response. At the same time, the kind of comprehensive communication with the rangers acts really as the eyes and ears for park staff and allows the park staff and the rangers to understand what's happening in the parks when they're not there. So I think that's a good kind of two-pronged approach. That leads me to our next question. And this is, again, for the group, how do we discourage bad behavior? We touched a little bit on this, in terms of enforcement. We touched a little bit on this, Teresa, you did, in terms of kind of self-policing, right? The community needs to be working within itself. Is there anything else that Pam, Joanne, Teresa, Melanie, that you guys want to add to this, $1 million question, which is how do we discourage this bad behavior?
Oh, if I may start, I think if it's something that's illegal, then we can cite them. Unfortunately, a lot of the behavior that we're talking about today is actually more courtesy. And our rangers really work hard at helping people understand the courtesy side of it. It's not always well received where people really don't care, and that makes it hard. And 95% of our users are amazing. They're courteous, they're respectful, they care about our parks, they care about each other. It's that 5% of people who I think just feel like that's their playground and they get to do whatever they want. And I think this is where we need your help, is really getting the word out that in order for us to all enjoy our parks, we all need to play a part. And if there's something that you think that we should be doing and promoting, then please let us know. Because I think we as a team will be stronger in being able to get that message out of be respectful, be aware of your surroundings and share. Sort of like, remember in the old days, not that long ago probably, but for you younger ones might not remember this, but with the bike lanes, it was share the road. It was there's people that are biking on that road in the bike lanes. And I think it's the same thing where it's share the trails. Let's be aware and share them.
This is Amy. I'd like to jump in for just a moment on the how to address bad behavior as a trail user. First of all, I think the attitude, if I want to ask you about confrontations or interactions amongst the users, if behavior is observed and you think it's appropriate, but I, for one, know that I tend to get mad. And so if I respond right at the moment, I'm not always putting my best foot forward. So definitely attitude weighs into that. But I'd actually like to throw that out to either Brad or Steve as someone who's out on the trail all the time, how they've seen or how they recommend an interaction, or whether that's just a bad idea.
Thanks, Amy. We initially anticipated that we wouldn't have a conversation, among different participants in this group. I am comfortable, there's not that many of us on here, and I'm comfortable knowing the participants, and Steve, knowing you real well. I'm comfortable with kicking that to you or Mike or David. We'll get back on track in a sec, but I think Amy has a good point. And Steve, if you'd like to address that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, sure. This is Steve Larsen. I am the president of the Share Mountain Bike Club, for those of you that don't know me. This is something we've been working on for over 30 years, sharing the trails. That's been kind of our mantra from day one. Getting people out there and, teaching them the right thing is really important. So we've tried to do that. Obviously, we've been trying to help out with the Bell program. We believe that's a good way of doing things. But, no matter what, it takes cooperation from everyone. I did want to throw out that this is not a problem just in Orange County. The International Mountain Bike Association has teamed up with a bunch of the hiking and other groups and started a new program that Trails Are Common Ground. That was kicked off last week. It's got a lot of great information on all of these subjects. So, I believe, there's a lot of focus going forward on being able to use the trails, especially with all the extra usage.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. And Melanie, maybe we can share that resource in our recap on Trails Are Common Ground, the new IMBA program. That sounds like a great tool.
Hallie, do you mind if I comment just real quick, add to Steve's remarks?
Absolutely, David.
So David Browning, OCMTBA, we're an umbrella coalition of a lot of the local clubs, including Share. So Steve and I work very closely together. Just so all the user groups are aware, we are trying like crazy to kind of head off the trail etiquette on a positive front with education, both in existing rider communities as well as with new riders. We have an online survey that an existing rider can take. It's a fun kind of a test to go through and remind folks of why we have the kind of rules we have that help us to coexist in the trails. We have a card. This is a copy of a card that gets distributed at storefronts. This is for new bike riders that are purchasing for the first time, so they can meet a club that's in OCMTBA, and that club can then take them out and kind of show them the right ways to go at the trail experience in the Orange County parks and the Orange County lands. And we are in concert with Share, trying to get behind putting as many bells as possible. Not to over-amplify Steve's point, but you guys should know Share's purchased 12,500 bells that have been distributed in Orange County, trail bells. I don't think there's any use group that can say that except for Share. And we're going to get behind that even further. You'll hear news of a fundraiser event in the coming days that'll allow us all to get together and put our money where our mouth is and getting those bells out there, because that does seem to be a important element to trail safety. But again, education of new riders, validation of current riders and how they should play, the trail bells. And then when we do stuff like fundraisers, to Alan's point in the chat, getting all the use groups together. So we put faces to names, we meet each other. And the lady that was asking the question there, so that we know we're all human and we remember that. And I think that helps our experience as much as anything. When we interact on a trail and it's somebody that we were at a fundraiser with last week, or that we sat and staffed a booth at a trailhead to distribute bells one day, it'll make it easier for us to be nice, to remember we have a great place to ride, hike, or ride our horses, and to be good with the other people on the trails.
Thank you, David. My favorite analogy is that I'm always a very courteous driver when I'm driving around my kids' schools, right? Because I know exactly who those other parents are, and I don't want to get called out for being, a jerk driver. So when we know people, we certainly are definitely more courteous. So we don't have that much time in remaining, so I'm just going to get us back on track with these questions. We have a couple different areas that we need to discuss. Certainly, the partnership opportunities and the ways for people to get involved. So I'm going to kick that to you first, Pam. Just really, how can people get involved in Orange County parks? when we have, questions about what's going on, what is the best way for people to kind of plug in?
So I think the first thing is to go to our website. It is chock full of information. I just navigated a very small piece. And so a lot of times the answers will be there. We also have on there ways to be able to access us as staff. If you're in a park and you have questions, we typically have staff that are on site. So you might see if you see a nature center, there's staff there. You can ask them questions, get maps of the parks, ask them specific questions about the park, let them know of any concerns that you have. So it's really right there on site. You'll also see maintenance staff that are working in each of our parks. The difference between our maintenance and our park rangers, you'll see a patch or a badge on our park rangers. And so I'm trying to go higher so that you can see that. But our maintenance folks, they are extremely educated on the parks and understand them. So, always feel free to say hi. With COVID, maybe to have some space with those protocols. The other thing is that we have public meetings. And so our OC Parks Commission, all of that information is online. So you can see what the agenda is ahead of time and be able to look and see, is this something that I'm interested in? You can also always come to our commission meetings and just talk during public speaking, or just come and listen. The public are always welcome. If you're specifically interested in trails, which I know all of you are, I would encourage you to participate in the trail subcommittee meetings. Those, as I showed you earlier, everything's online. All the agendas will be posted ahead of time. So you can see, is there something that I'm of interested in? Or is it something that maybe they should be interested in? And then again, you can talk during public comments and bring that up. So there's a lot of different ways to be involved in what we do and to be able to say, hey, this is what I would love to see, or you're doing things great. We like to hear that too. So if you ever want to say that, we'll listen to that as well. So I think those are the basic ways to be able to get involved with what we do and be able to answer questions. And then working with our partners like all of you.
Thank you. I really do want to reiterate what you're saying in terms of getting involved in the Trails Subcommittee and the Parks Commission. I know that, certainly I've heard from people who are like, hey, I didn't know about this, or I want to learn more. And, the Parks is really trying to, from my understanding, and I'm not trying to speak for you, Pam, trying to, funnel that public interaction to the Parks Commission meetings and the Trail Subcommittee meetings. So I really encourage all of you guys to get involved and follow those agendas, see what those committees are talking about, and use that as a mechanism for communication. I think while it's important certainly to connect with the rangers and with the park staff, it's also important to be connecting directly with headquarters, and the Parks Commissions and Trail Subcommittee are the best ways to do that. So just in our last few minutes here, I really want to talk about the habitat and the $1 million question, right? Are we loving our parks to death? Are we actually seeing impacts to the parks that are not recoverable from? And if we can talk just a little bit about that, what you guys what Parks is seeing out on the trails, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. So we are loving our parks. I don't think to death yet. Our team really works hard at making sure that our parks not only look good, but actually are well maintained as far as habitat. And so our natural resources team, and that's a team of 3 staff people, they are making sure that when we're doing a project in our parks, that they're part of that process and making sure that we're not doing something that is going to be detrimental to our parks and the natural habitat. And so they're a key piece of making sure that we're maintaining them in a way that is in line with making it natural and really protecting them, I guess is probably the best way to say it, is we want to make sure we're protecting our parks. And sometimes it's protecting our parks from ourselves as far as users. It was mentioned earlier about the unauthorized trails. When our staff find out about unauthorized trails, we stop it and we put it back as quickly as we can. Sometimes, especially during COVID, we didn't see some of the things right away and we weren't being told about them. And so that made it a little bit more challenging. And we're so happy that our nature centers are back open, because that's usually the best way that we find out about things that maybe aren't off of our regular paths. It's a little bit easier to see when it's very clear. And I think it's also telling people that if it doesn't have an OC Parks Trail sign, it's not authorized. So I think that helps a lot.
Right.
But yeah, so.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. So I know that we didn't get to everything. Melanie has been, done a phenomenal job of monitoring the chat, and we'll certainly be incorporating questions that we haven't had a chance to answer. I just want to let you guys know that we're going to have a little bit of a recap. So those of you who are in attendance, you sign up using your email. So we will be sending out an email from Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks, and that email will contain a link to a recording of this presentation, which you're welcome to share on FHBP's YouTube channel. We will be sending you a survey asking, of the Safe Trails Coalition, what groups you might want to get involved in, as well as a reminder of some of the key talking points that we've hit here. So, what the best place to plug in is, and then asking for any additional questions that we missed and that weren't submitted in the chat. So just keep an eye out for that. This is the beginning of a conversation. This is not the end of the conversation. An hour goes by really, really quickly. And we covered as much as we possibly could. So I'll go ahead and wrap things up in these last 2 minutes, unless Pam, you have any final comments for us.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to all of you.
Thank you. Melanie, did I miss anything?
No, I think you covered everything. My goal is to have the email out by the end of the week due to family circumstances. So it won't be today.
No problem. No problem. By the end of the week is great. I'm really happy to see all of you guys on this call. So thank you to everyone who took time out of your busy schedules to be a part of this. We're all on the same team. We all want to protect our parks and our open space. So thank you. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
You got a thumbs up.